Alright everyone, good morning, afternoon, and or evening ladies and gentlemen. I felt I should knock out part 2 of the '04 championship series, this being the build-up on the Lakers side of things, because one, it's going to be shorter because we know so much about this team already, and two, I am so hyped from watching DeAndre Hopkins moss 3 Bills to score a game-winning touchdown that I just needed to get this video out of my system. Alright, so without further ado, roll the intro.
I don't really have a good intro right now, but on this channel I like to talk sports.
Despite the fact that this would be the last year of the Kobe and Shaq Lakers, this team still had a lot of the same core as the three-peat squad. Of course, Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal, but also Rick Fox, Devin George, and Derek Fisher, who would become very important in the story later on. This is also the year that the Lakers would bring in Gary Payton and Karl Malone to help their team out, after being bounced in the Western Conference Finals a year earlier by the San Antonio Spurs. Despite Payton being 35 and Malone being 40, their production in the previous season was still pretty good enough to justify them being signed. In 2003, Payton averaged around 20 points, 8 assists, and almost 2 steals a game, even with being traded mid-season to Milwaukee. And in the playoffs with the Bucks, Payton would average 18 points, 8 assists, and a steal per game, in a series where they would be bounced 4-2 by the New Jersey Nets in the first round. Malone, on the other hand, at 39, still averaged 20 points, 8 rebounds, and almost 5 assists a game for Utah. In the playoffs, with Utah being bounced 4-1 by the Sacramento Kings, Malone would still put up around 19 points, 7 rebounds, and almost 2 steals for those 5 games. In the draft of that year, the Lakers would select Brian Cook and Luke Walton. Cook would become the backup center for the team, bounce around for a few years, and then get traded. Walton would actually become a quality role player for the team, a fan favorite amongst Lakers, and in fact would become their head coach from the years of 2016 to 2019. And in fact, he is still a head coach in the league in the process of ruining the Sacramento Kings. However, in this year, there was trouble in paradise. Very well documented trouble. They say winning cures all ills, and this was no different when it came to the Lakers. The beef between Kobe and Shaq was well documented, as Kobe was not a big fan of the big man's practice habits, or lack thereof, and their personalities did not mesh very well. But three-peats are three-peats, and they could get over it. However, being bounced in the Western Conference Finals to a big rival of theirs really began to show some of the flaws in the team. In an argument in practice one time, Shaq in fact yelled at Lakers GM Mitch Kupchak to trade him. Kupchak would do so a year later. Kobe was also looking to be traded. In fact, he was so close to being signed and traded in the offseason to Chicago that he and his wife were looking at houses and schools in the Windy City. Shaq was also looking for a contract extension, even though he still had 1 year left on his deal and a player option for the next year after that. Along with that, there were some well-documented reports of Kobe and Karl Malone not getting along. Of course, Karl Malone, being a known scumbag, tried to hit on Vanessa Bryant. One of the reported incidents that got leaked said that Malone was walking around wearing a cowboy hat and boots. Vanessa, who was friends with him at the time, asked him what he was hunting. He said, and I quote, "little Mexican girls," which has a lot darker of a context if you know about the other story. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on from that. This, of course, was also the year that Kobe was dealing with his sexual assault case. Being back and forth in Colorado, that made him miss 20 games out of the Lakers season. The struggles of the Lakers on the court would also continue. Gary Payton really struggled, as he was so used to the free-flowing offense that was run by the Sonics that the strict rules of the triangle run by Phil Jackson were an unknown, and he had little time to get adapted to them. Speaking of Phil Jackson also said that in his book, The Last Season, this would be his last year with the Lakers. Jackson had been dealing with health problems, which had really boiled over, and so, win or lose, he knew it would be his last season in LA. Until he came back a few years later, but that's not the time for that. While Payton did struggle with the new offense, he still managed to be the 3rd leading scorer on the team with 13 points per game, still playing fairly good defense as well. Karl Malone struggled with injuries the entire year, averaging about 13 points and 7 rebounds a game. Even with Kobe missing 20 games out of the year, he still led the team in points per game with 24, Shaq being right behind him with his usual dominant self, averaging 21 points, 11 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks a game. The Lakers started the season 18-3, but with off-the-court issues and injuries hobbling the team, they would struggle mightily at points during the season, finishing the year 56-26. Kobe and Shaq were all-stars, and the team, despite all that, was still second in the West. They also faced the Pistons twice in the regular season, one time beating them 94-89 in LA, and the other losing 106-96 in the Palace at Auburn Hills. The Lakers would finish the regular season with the 6th best offense in the league and the 8th best defense in the league. In the playoffs, they would start out against the 7th-seeded Houston Rockets, which was highlighted by the matchup down low between second-year Yao Ming and Shaquille O'Neal himself. Another big moment in the series was Karl Malone, who in Game 5 had 30 points and 13 rebounds in an overtime victory. That would close out the series, the Lakers winning 4-1 and moving on to the second round. In the second round, they would face an old foe, the San Antonio Spurs. The Lakers would start their first 2 games bad. They would drop their first 2, losing one 88-78 and the other one 95-85. Then the Lakers kicked it into high gear, winning 4 in a row. These were highlighted by Kobe's 40-point performance in Game 4 and Derek Fisher hitting a buzzer beater in Game 5 to beat the Spurs by 1 point. In Game 6, however, the Lakers truly put their foot down. Kobe would have 26 points, and Shaq dominated the paint with 19 rebounds. The Lakers would also outscore the Spurs 32-24 in the fourth quarter to win and advance to the Western Conference Finals versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. This Timberwolves team was good. Very good. They were the first seed in the West that year at 58-24. Kevin Garnett would win MVP that year. He would average 24 points, 13 rebounds, 2 blocks, and a steal and a half for the year. A supporting cast of Sam Cassell, who would have 19 points and 7 assists for the year, and Latrell Sprewell, who would average 16 points that year, would also make up a formidable backcourt. The team had the 5th best offense and 6th best defense in the league. The Lakers would win the first game, 97-88, then lose the next one, 89-71. They would then win the next game, 100-85, and then the next, 92-85. They would then lose in Game 5, 98-96. In a do-or-die Game 6, Minnesota would put up a fight, but it would come up short. They would lose 96-90, and the Lakers were in the NBA Finals. The Lakers were, of course, the heavy favorites. They had all the names, and they had all the star power. Detroit from the very beginning was the massive underdog. The Lakers had Kobe and Shaq, 2 old veterans in Gary Payton and Karl Malone looking for their first rings. The Lakers had championship experience and 3 wins and were looking for revenge in being eliminated in the playoffs the previous year. The Pistons, relatively, were an upstart, ranging from a smaller market and a team that hadn't made the finals since 1990. Unlike the high-flying Lakers, the Pistons thrived on defense and gritty, grinding games. This Pistons team was going up against Kobe and Shaq, with not a single player that had averaged more than 20 points per game that season. As the media thought, and many fans thought, it would be a bloodbath. But that will be reserved for Part 3. Well, make sure to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Part 3 coming very soon, probably 2 days from now because I have a long shift tomorrow. And with that, I am gone. Deuces.